أهلا بكم من جديد. تبدأ الآن جلسة نتساءل فيها ما الاختلال الرقمي وماذا يعني ذلك بالنسبة للشركات، وما الذي يمكن أن تفعله الشركات لفهم الاتجاهات المستقبلية والتصرف حيالها. تلك هي أهم محاور هذه الجلسة، وهي الثالثة اليوم في يومنا الأول. يتحدث فيها توم جودوين، وهو إعلامي وخبير في التكنولوجيا والابتكار. Please welcome.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to talk a bit about these two words, digital transformation and digital disruption, which are two words that at the moment everybody is talking about. So I wanted to just try and explain an opinion on what they mean, what they represent, and to try and cut through quite a lot of the clutter. Now, a good way to think about this is to do a little game. So if I ask you all to imagine in your head what an extremely fast car looks like and what companies make them, you probably come up with a list of classic automotive brands. If you have to do a list of the fastest accelerating vehicles in the world, you find that the fourth fastest car is the Porsche 918 from a company with over 100 years of automotive history. Very low to the ground, very impractical, extremely expensive. The next fastest car is the Bugatti Veyron, unbelievably expensive, unbelievably impractical. You're never going to get over a speed hump in this vehicle. I can't fit any shopping in the back of it. The next fastest car is Ferrari. Again, there's a pattern here. These are all automotive companies with a long pedigree of making extremely fast sports cars. They are optimized to go fast. They are wildly impractical, and they have huge petrol engines in them that consume vast amounts of gasoline. But the very fastest car in the world right now, by some tests, is the Tesla. This looks radically different to all the others. It's from a car company with a tenth of the experience of the others. It's surprisingly affordable, surprisingly practical, and it became the fastest car overnight because of a software update. The owners of this vehicle sat with their car in a garage one day, and the next day it was faster. This is a radical departure from how cars work. You know, I own a BMW, and every time I get in it, it's definitely worse than the time before. So we have to ask ourselves what's going on. And for me, the process that has led to the Tesla is a good example of what I'm calling new disruption. And I'm going to explain in this presentation where this theory comes from, what it's about, and what it means. So this is today's presentation. I'm going to introduce myself a tiny bit more and explain to you why I'm here. I'm going to talk about this notion of the paradigm leap, this ability to jump into a wildly different way of creating products and services. And I'm going to talk a bit about the power of digital transformation and how companies can think about technology for now and for the future. So a tiny bit about me. It's common to hear people say the world is changing faster than ever before. It's common to talk about the accelerating rate of change. But I'm also aware that from one day to the next, not everything is different. Like, I am here in person. I'm not an avatar that's been broadcast here. Like, we probably came here in similar cars to that from 10 years ago. There are no drones that are flying overhead. These are not 3D printed seats. Like, from one day to the next, most things are quite similar, but we have to be aware of the change that happens. So a lot of my job is about traveling around the world and understanding both what has changed, but also what stays the same. And generally speaking, there is a spectrum with a lot of people saying, oh my goodness, everything is different. We need to throw away everything we've ever learned before. And you get paid a lot of money to do that. And there are a lot of people who kind of wish the internet had never happened, that kind of wish they could do their job like they used to, and they think that everything is totally fine. And it's my job to try and navigate the space between those extreme viewpoints and to spark interesting conversations. So I write for publications like the following. I have a claim to fame, which is to have written this quote. So if you've seen this quote about Uber, Airbnb, Alibaba on the internet, I was the person that wrote this, and that led to me having interesting conversations with clients. So I work for a company called Publicis Media, and I help our clients understand technology and what it means for their business, and I give them practical steps on what to do about it. And I've also written a book as well, which is surprisingly hard to get hold of in this region, but it discusses some of these themes. So the power of the paradigm leap. You saw before with the example of Tesla how creativity can skip. And I think in order to understand that, we need to understand how design works and how the design process works. And design really needs constraints. If you say to an architect, build something somewhere with some money, their head will explode. They need to have an idea of what it does, what direction the sun faces, how big the plot is, what the budget is. We need to come up with some ways to shape the design. And I think it's those assumptions or those design criteria or the design brief that is what creates an iterative design process. And it's rather like evolution. In the same way that species mutate to become better suited to the environment, we find that the creative process is very similar. So what tends to happen is there is a brief or a job to be done. How do we get people from A to B? How do we house people comfortably? How do we sell more speakers to people? Whatever the brief is, this is the input into a design process. And there are assumed criteria that we all follow that over time leads to refinement and leads to an optimal solution. These may be things like material science or gravity or budget. These may be fixed, or it may be our own assumptions about the way that a problem is solved. Now, to give you an example, I'm sure some of you or all of you remember this device here. This was the world's first portable music player. This was designed to allow us to listen to music anywhere we wanted. When it came in, it was totally revolutionary. We were not used to having a soundtrack to our life. Now, this was incredibly expensive. The battery power was terrible. The sound quality was awful. It was very heavy. It was very big. It was the best ever Walkman the world had ever known, but it still wasn't particularly good. But we only knew it wasn't that good when there was a better one. So slowly, people worked on the design challenge, and they realized it had to follow the shape of the cassette, and it had to have low-powered motors, and it needed to have some way to make the sound quality better. So they invented Dolby B and then Dolby C, and no one really knows what that was, but we know it made it better. And the device got cheaper, and it got thinner. And over time, it got really good. Maybe 10 years later, you could buy something like this. It was better than all other Walkmans that came before. It was quite cheap. The sound quality was great. It had a radio. It was thin. You could rewind, and you could fast forward without taking the tape out. You didn't have to stick it on a pencil and spin it around. This was the best ever Walkman the world had ever known. And just when this came out, we got the world's first Discman. And the world's first Discman was the worst ever portable CD player, but it was still better than the best ever cassette player. And now, engineers had different problems. They needed to understand lasers. They needed to understand things like digital technology and how to store music and how to create anti-shock. All of the experience we'd had with solving the problems in the Walkman was suddenly completely useless. Knowing Dolby B and C, completely useless. Knowing how to do rewind motors, completely useless. And this is what I call the paradigm leap. And this is what happens when people change the assumptions about what a solution looks like. It means the expertise from before is largely irrelevant or unhelpful. It means that the solution looks radically different to everything before it. And we see this everywhere. So with music, we had this smooth evolution, and then this jump to the Discman. And then exactly the same thing happened with the Discman. It got better, cheaper, smaller, lighter, faster, you name it. And then we had the world's worst MP3 player. And the world's worst MP3 player still required completely different engineers. They needed to understand user interfaces. They needed to understand hard disk storage. The people that made the Discman, completely useless now. And this process keeps on happening. The MP3 player got better, and then we had the mobile phone, and we don't need to store music anymore, and nothing in the MP3 player really matters anymore. Wow. So this is the process of the paradigm leap, and we see it everywhere around us. As your homework, I want you to all go away and think about paradigms. Think about things that have assumptions about how we make things, and when people come along and do something wildly different. So we had the era of the horse-drawn carriage. Then we had the era of the horseless carriage. Then it got better and better and better, and it starts looking like this. And then we have electric cars, and the people that make electric cars have to solve radically different problems, like how do we charge these things? Like how do we create GPS software to guide people to the charging stations? Like how do we find battery engineers? And then probably the next paradigm of automotive will be self-driving cars, where all of a sudden it will mainly be about software engineers and not hardware engineers. And all of a sudden we won't be buying vehicles, we will be renting access to vehicles. And all of a sudden the entire dealership network doesn't make any sense anymore. We see it in other places, telling the time, the paradigm of sundials, the paradigm of mechanical clocks, the paradigm of watches, the paradigm of LCD watches, totally different solution. And then now we have a paradigm where people don't really wear watches. The only reason you wear a watch is to tell other people your status in life, not to tell the time. We had it with money, the era of cowrie shells, the era of coins, the era of dollars, of paper money, the era of credit cards and digital transactions. And then now we have the proliferation of new solutions trying to replace physical or even notional digital money. You will note that some of these paradigms exist at the same time. We live in a world with credit cards, with Apple Pay, with Bitcoin, with coins, not many cowrie shells around, but other than that, things are complex. So when you look at some of the best ever products that have ever been made, they're often the first products in this new paradigm. Many of the people that have made tons and tons and tons of money and completely changed how we think about categories are the people that develop this first solution. The Tesla, Elon Musk completely blew away all assumptions about automotive. He did stuff that people with decades of experience told him couldn't be done while he was doing it. The Dyson vacuum cleaner. Before the Dyson, most people spent about $80 on a vacuum cleaner and they didn't care about it at all. The Dyson came out with a selling price of about $500, and people have never been so excited about a vacuum cleaner in their life before. The iPhone. I worked for Nokia when the iPhone came out. We had lots and lots of research groups tell us they didn't want a touchscreen phone. It was going to break. It was going to be too heavy. They were going to get fingerprints on the screen. Apple came out, and because they didn't really know what they were doing, they did something far better than anyone else in the industry had done before and became the world's first trillion-dollar company. Uber. Travis Kalanick from Uber did not spend his life driving taxis and think there is a better way to drive taxis. He came to it from a completely different angle and has created one of the world's most valuable companies. Netflix. Netflix is not made by TV executives figuring out how to do better TV. It comes from an ex-teacher who thought he could post DVDs through the mail. Red Bull. There is no focus group on the planet that ever said that Red Bull was a good idea. It's incredibly expensive. It tastes disgusting. Like, no focus group would pass this idea. It was not made by Coca-Cola or Pepsi. It was made by a weird Austrian that just thought, let's give this a try. So I think we have to look at these success stories and think, have these people succeeded despite this lack of experience? Have they been lucky? Are they just wildly imaginative but a bit stupid? Or have they experienced because of this lack of experience? And increasingly, I think it's the latter. Increasingly, I think the greatest risk to most companies is that they know what they're doing in a world that's changing so fast that someone will come over the top of them and solve the problem in a radically different way. So I'm going to give you two annoying questions. They are both helpful but rather frustrating. And the first one is, what assumptions do you make in your everyday business that are not necessarily fixed things? Are we assuming the way to listen to music is through a cassette player? Are we assuming the way to make a car is to have a petrol engine? Like, sometimes I think the best person to do my job would be like a 6 to 8-year-old child who would just say, why, all day long, and you would realize we all make assumptions about the way that problems are solved. The second part, the power of digital transformation. I think we think that a lot of the world has changed, where actually we've tended to pull through old examples of how we did things through a new digital frame. If you look at this is the website for Sears.com. Not the greatest retailer on earth, admittedly, but it looks very similar to their catalog of over 100 years ago. We've taken what a catalog looks like and pulled it through onto a digital screen. If you look at newspapers, a newspaper homepage today looks like a digital version of a newspaper. It doesn't look like Facebook. It's weird. If you look at advertising, like the ad on the left is from 1880. The ad on the right is from last week on Instagram. We've taken exactly the same form and assumptions and process, and we pulled it through onto digital paper. When we look to the future, lots of people think the future will be virtual reality, where we stick on a headset and pretend we're in someone else's living room and watch the same movie on a big screen in someone's lounge. That doesn't make sense. The future of e-retail is not to put on a headset and be in a virtual shopping mall. It's to rethink what shopping malls are. Self-driving cars, they look exactly like cars. Why are we assuming they have to look like cars? Why don't they go 25 miles per hour? Why don't they fit one person? Why is there not a fleet of different types of vehicles? So you can choose a minibus when you're doing a family vacation and a tiny little pod when you're going to the supermarket. And we build on top of old models and old business practices. So this is Instacart, which is a multi-billion-dollar app. And what happens is retailers, they rent retail spaces, they furnish them, they light them, they employ staff to put products onto the shelf. And then they employ more staff to go around the shelves and pick up the same products, stick them in a basket, and deliver them. This is a very clumsy way to think about business. It's to take everything we've done before and build this digital garnish or this digital layer on top of processes that don't make sense anymore. I think we live in an era where technology tends to have 3 stages. There is a pre-technology stage, when life makes sense, when we're comfortable with the technology, when society and business models have understood what it means. There is a mid-technology phase, which is where this technology arrives and everything is very complicated and chaotic and confusing, and people make stupid mistakes, and companies go bankrupt, and we don't quite figure out what it means. We tend to add it to the existing ways of doing things because that's how we know how to do things. And then there is this post-technology phase. And the post-technology phase is when we understand how that technology changes our behaviors. We understand how that technology changes our expectations. We understand how it changes business models, economics. And it's that stage when people reimagine what's possible. They rethink these businesses from scratch. Now, this has happened pretty much with every form of profound technology. When you read about the advent of steam power, like they created incredibly powerful steam engines, and their first use of steam engines was to use them to lift up water to power water wheels, because that's how factories got powered. It took 10 years for someone to look at a huge steam engine and think, why don't we just replace the water wheel, right, rather than using this to lift up water to power the same factory. It happened with electricity. When electricity was created or invented or understood, there are lots of books written about the fact that no one really knows what to do with it. The first uses of electricity in the home were to power Christmas tree lights, because no one could kind of figure out how it made sense. We then had the AC versus DC battles, where no one really knew what the best form of technology was. It's a very interesting way to think about this, because all of those errors only make sense in retrospect. And I think we're at this mid-technology stage with the internet and connectivity. If you look at most aspects of our lives, we've added on technology as a garnish to what we did before. You go to a school and people have iPads and we do distance learning, but we have not rethought the education sector around what technology means. What does it mean for our careers? What does it mean for our livelihoods? How do we better prepare kids to understand the future? Because it probably doesn't involve the same things as the past. You can go to a bank, and banks will have a little robot in the corner, which will allow you to have a new experience on top of an antiquated system, which increasingly doesn't make sense. So it's interesting to go through different companies. And rudely, I don't know what sectors you're all in, but it's amazing to think, you know, if your company was going to thrive in 2025, what would it actually be doing? What would the role be that it plays in people's lives? Because it might be something radically different. If you understand people's expectations, behaviors, and what technology makes possible, you might rethink your business in a radical way. So my second and my final and most annoying question is this one. Next time you're looking out of the window as you're being driven by an Uber driver or you're on a plane, think today, if you knew everything that you knew right now about people, technology, business, like what would your business look like? Because I'm pretty sure it probably wouldn't look like it does. And then the question becomes, how do you get there? And that's a much harder question to answer. So hopefully you've enjoyed my presentation. Hopefully I've been annoying but polite, disruptive but useful. Thank you very much for your time.